January 15th, 1990, Martin Luther King Day. Somewhere around 2 a.m., William O'Neal walked out of his Uncle Ben Hurd's apartment in Maywood, Illinois, ran onto Interstate 290, the Eisenhower Expressway, and stepped in front of a moving car. He was 40 years old. The Cook County medical examiner ruled it a suicide. His wife said it was an accident. 21 years earlier, O'Neal had infiltrated the Black Panther Party for the FBI. He had drawn a floor plan of an apartment on West Monroe Street in Chicago. He had marked the location of every door, every window, and the bed where Fred Hampton slept. He had handed that floor plan to his FBI handler, Roy Martin Mitchell. 14 days later, Hampton was dead. O'Neal's uncle told the Chicago Reader that when O'Neal went back to the apartment after the raid, he stood in the doorway and couldn't move. Paper strewn across the floor, blood everywhere, a trail of blood from where they had dragged Hampton's body. He never thought it would come to that. This is the Hampton story you haven't heard, not from Hampton's perspective, from the informants. William O'Neal was born April 9, 1949, and grew up on the west side of Chicago. By 17, he had been involved in car theft, home invasion, kidnapping, and worse. In 1966, he stole a car and drove it across state lines into Michigan. That's a federal offense. It should have sent him to prison. Instead, it sent him to FBI agent Roy Martin Mitchell. Mitchell saw something in O'Neal. He was a kid who could talk his way into anything, fast and theatrical, with no allegiances. Mitchell offered him a deal. The car theft charge would disappear. O'Neal would get a monthly stipend. In exchange, he would infiltrate the Illinois Black Panther Party and report back to the Bureau. O'Neal was 17 or 18. He took the deal. By 1968, O'Neal had made himself indispensable to the Chicago Panthers. He was not just attending meetings, he was running security. Fred Hampton, who was 20 years old at the time, trusted him enough to make him head of security for the Illinois chapter. O'Neal had keys to Panther headquarters and safe houses across the city. He sat in on leadership meetings. He knew where Hampton slept, who visited, what weapons were in each location, and when the chapter was most vulnerable, every detail went to Mitchell. Weekly reports, floor plans, schedules. Hampton didn't know any of this. And that's what makes O'Neal's story different from every other informant story. Because what O'Neal was reporting back to Mitchell wasn't criminal activity. It was a 20-year-old feeding children. Every morning at 6 a.m., Hampton ran political education classes. Hampton broke down Marx and Mao into language that high school dropouts could understand. After class, the Panthers served free breakfast, eggs, toast, juice. O'Neal watched kids line up before school every day. He reported it to Mitchell. The FBI categorized the breakfast program as indoctrination. Then Hampton started building something no one had seen before. He connected with a Puerto Rican organization called the Young Lords, led by Jose Cha-Cha Jimenez, a street gang turned political movement fighting gentrification and police brutality in Lincoln Park. Hampton brought them in. Then the 20-year-old did the thing that broke everyone's brain. Hampton reached out to the Young Patriots, a group of poor white Appalachians in uptown Chicago. They wore Confederate flag patches on their jackets. Their members had migrated from Kentucky and Tennessee looking for factory work and found the same poverty, the same brutal cops, the same slum landlords that Black and Puerto Rican communities faced. A Panther named Bob Lee, a field marshal in the Illinois chapter, went to a Young Patriots meeting and heard them talking about police brutality and unaffordable rent. The same problems. He stood up and said they were fighting the same enemy. When Bob Lee told Hampton, Hampton immediately saw it. Not a race war, a class war. He told his Panthers they were going to fight racism, not with racism, but with solidarity. In spring 1969, they made it official. The Rainbow Coalition, Black Panthers, Young Lords, Young Patriots, they wore a button striped with black, red, brown, and white. Everyone wore the same button. Equal. The visual was striking. Fred Hampton in a black beret walking arm in arm with William Preacher Fesperman of the Young Patriots, who still had a Confederate flag on his jacket, walking into meetings together, holding joint rallies that drew thousands. O'Neal watched all of it from the inside. O'Neal sat in the meetings. He heard the debates. The informant watched Hampton negotiate a truce between rival street gangs on live television. He watched the crowds get bigger every week. And every week, he filed his report with Mitchell. Here's what they're doing. Here's who's coming. Here's where Hampton sleeps. Years later, after everything that happened, O'Neal said Hampton was genuinely a good guy. He said he couldn't find any dirt on him, no corruption, no violence, nothing the FBI could actually use. So they stopped trying to arrest him. The FBI needed the coalition to stop. O'Neal was how. In the summer of 1969, Chicago police raided Panther offices, arrested members, and burned the building. But Hampton was not deterred. He kept organizing. The FBI kept watching, and O'Neal kept reporting. Then came December 3rd, 1969. That evening, Hampton taught a political education class at a local church. Afterward, he and several Panthers went back to his apartment at 2307 West Monroe Street. O'Neal had prepared dinner. According to FBI records and later investigations, O'Neal slipped secobarbital, a barbiturate, into Hampton's drink. Cook County chemist Eleanor Berman later ran 2 tests on Hampton's blood. Both showed evidence of barbiturates. Hampton was not known to take drugs. Around 1:30 a.m. on December 4th, Hampton fell asleep mid-sentence while talking to his mother on the telephone. His fiancée, Deborah Johnson, 9 months pregnant, was lying next to him. O'Neal left the apartment before the raid. He had already given the FBI the floor plan. The FBI had passed it to Cook County State's Attorney Edward Hanrahan's office. Hanrahan organized the raid using a 14-man team from his Special Prosecutions Unit. They had a search warrant for illegal weapons. They arrived at 4 a.m. What happened next took 12 seconds. The team entered through the front and rear simultaneously. They fired between 82 and 99 rounds into the apartment. The Panthers fired 1. That single shot came from Mark Clark's shotgun as he fell after being fatally hit. It discharged reflexively. Fred Hampton was shot twice in the head while unconscious in his bed. Deborah Johnson was dragged from the room. She later said Hampton raised his head slowly, eyes open, then laid it back down. That was the only movement he made. Mark Clark was dead. Hampton was dead. 4 other Panthers were wounded. The 7 survivors were indicted on charges of attempted murder. Every charge was later dropped. The police called it a shootout. The ballistics called it an execution. O'Neal's role stayed hidden for 3 years. On February 3, 1973, the Chicago Tribune published a front-page story identifying O'Neal as an FBI informant. Attorney Jeffrey Haas, who had known O'Neal for years through the Panther defense work, read the story that morning and could not believe it. Could the guy with the disarming smile be involved in this? O'Neal was immediately placed in the Federal Witness Protection Program under the name William Hart and relocated to California. His marriage collapsed under the strain. He reportedly returned to Chicago in 1984, living quietly and working for a downtown attorney. In 1984, O'Neal gave a rare interview to the Chicago Tribune. O'Neal said he had no remorse. He said if he had not met Mitchell, he would probably be in jail or dead. The former informant said if the gains outweighed the losses, he thought so. Then he said this, "If you ask me if I'm a happy man, I'm not happy. No, I'm not even content." 5 years later, on April 13, 1989, O'Neal sat for an interview with the PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize 2. 5 months after that interview, in September 1989, O'Neal ran into traffic for the first time. He survived with injuries. Nobody connected it to the interview, not yet. It was the most extensive on-camera account he had ever given. O'Neal described being recruited by Mitchell. He talked about life inside the Panthers. The former informant described his feelings about what happened. O'Neal denied drugging Hampton. The forensic evidence disagreed. Then O'Neal talked about going back to the apartment after the raid. His body language shifted. The former head of security started looking past the camera. His voice dropped. I just began to realize that the information that I had supplied leading up to that moment had facilitated that raid. I knew that indirectly I had contributed, and I felt it, and I felt bad about it. And then I got mad, and then I had to conceal those feelings, which made it worse. I could not say anything. I just had to continue to play the role. The first episode of Eyes on the Prize 2 aired on January 15th, 1990, Martin Luther King Day. That night, O'Neal ran into traffic on the Eisenhower Expressway. He died before his own episode was broadcast. The documentary aired his interview on February 19, 1990. America watched a dead man describe the guilt that killed him. The civil lawsuit filed by Hampton's family took 13 years. In 1982, a federal jury found that the FBI, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and the Chicago Police Department had conspired to violate the civil rights of Hampton and the other Panthers in the apartment. The FBI, Cook County, and the city of Chicago settled for $1.85 million. Nobody went to prison. O'Neal had received a monthly stipend from the FBI for his work. The exact amount varied, but records indicate he was paid roughly $300 a month for drawing the floor plan, for drugging the drink, for delivering the chairman. The FBI got exactly what it wanted. The Rainbow Coalition collapsed after Hampton's death. The Illinois Panthers never recovered. The multiracial alliance that terrified Hoover was destroyed before Hampton turned 22. Without Hampton, the west side of Chicago degenerated into drugs and gang violence over the following decades. The community programs, the breakfast programs, the free clinics, the political education, all of it ended. 6 years later, the federal government launched the National School Breakfast Program. The same free breakfast the FBI had called indoctrination. When Hampton served it, became official government policy once they had killed the man who created it. In 1984, Jesse Jackson ran for president and named his campaign the Rainbow Coalition. He never credited Fred Hampton. He stripped out the class analysis and the socialism and turned it into a standard Democratic Party operation. The name survived. The man who built the idea did not. O'Neal watched Hampton build the breakfast program from the inside. He ate at the same table. He reported it to Mitchell as intelligence. Then the FBI facilitated Hampton's assassination. The federal government adopted his program, and they gave O'Neal a new name so nobody would remember what he'd done. O'Neal lived 21 more years after the raid. He changed his name. He moved across the country. The former informant came back to Chicago. He told interviewers he wasn't sorry. Then he told a camera he felt bad about it. Then he ran into traffic on the anniversary of another assassination. The FBI used on the same playbook in Los Angeles that kept Geronimo Pratt imprisoned for 27 years. Julius Butler was an informant inside the Southern California Panthers. Like O'Neal, his status was hidden from the defense. His testimony convicted Geronimo Pratt of a murder the FBI's own wiretaps proved he didn't commit. Pratt served 27 years before a judge reversed the case on the same grounds. The prosecution hid the informant. Same mechanism, same result, different coasts. The informant recruitment model O'Neal was built from didn't end with COINTELPRO. When the Church Committee investigations exposed the program in 1975, the structure survived. Federal cooperating witness programs, confidential informant deals, reduced charges in exchange for testimony against your own community. The tool the FBI tested on a 17-year-old car thief in 1967 became standard practice. O'Neal's story was later dramatized in the 2021 film Judas and the Black Messiah, with Lakeith Stanfield portraying the conflicted informant whose betrayal destroyed a movement. His brother Bill Hampton said it plainly. It's something he tried to live with and couldn't. The FBI recruited a 17-year-old car thief, dropped his charges, put him on payroll, and used him to facilitate the assassination of a 21-year-old who was feeding children and building coalitions across racial lines. When the informant's role was exposed, they hid him in witness protection. When the lawsuit proved the conspiracy, they wrote a check. When the informant killed himself, they said nothing. The floor plan, O'Neill drew, is in the public record. It still has markings showing where Hampton's bed was. Hampton was shot twice in the head while lying in it, unconscious from the barbiturate O'Neill put in his drink. O'Neill was 40 when he died. Hampton was 21. The floor plan outlived them both.